I don't think a lot of people really realize how scary it can be to live out in the country. I mean, really. Sometimes people hear something and they don't know what it is. Oh, so scary. Or maybe they'll see some weird guy dressed shabby and acting weird. Newsflash, that's really the majority of people who live in the country. It probably seems weird or scary to people who listen to creepypasta narrators because they simply live in a different environment. But hey, I've lived in the country my entire life, and that sort of thing is run-of-the-mill. Do you want to hear a really scary country story? I mean, a really scary one. Make sure you're wearing your diapers, because this one is pretty out there. I grew up in a house that was just off a dirt road. Not a gravel road, a dirt road. There was a small creek on the west side of the property, so there was a small bridge that went over it. Not really too important, but just setting the scene. I lived in that house all my life growing up, and it was a shabby place to live. I never thought of it that way, though, because, after all, it was my home. There are some pretty awful people who do some pretty awful things if you travel far out enough in the country. And no, I don't mean they're inbred rednecks who torture and eat you for dinner like in the movies. But there are people who easily break the law, make drugs, hoard weapons, have animal fights. And for the most part, the law looks the other way because they don't want to disappear. I'm sure most of you probably think I'm full of it. But just consider yourself lucky that you never ever had an experience like the one I had with my friend Joe. Of course, that's not his real name, because I don't want anyone to know who we are. Growing up, we were always warned about places we shouldn't go. While we were allowed to explore the local hills, there was an area far off that we were told never to go near. There were signs on the trees that would warn you to go back. That was what my family always told me. They described the signs and told me that if I ever saw them, turn around and get out of there as quick as you can. The people who put those signs up were dangerous. But if you listened to the sign and turned left, they wouldn't do a thing to you. I can't tell you how many times in life I always heard, if you're going out into the woods and you see the signs, just turn away. There's nothing to be scared of unless you go past the trees that have the signs on them. Well, as boys get older, two things happen to them. They get both braver and they get stupider, but they also get curious. And to tell you the truth, Joe and I had been exploring the hills around our homes for years and years, and we had never even come across these so-called signs that we weren't supposed to go past. Around the time that we were 13 years old, we didn't even believe they even existed anymore. They were either something that the parents created in order to keep their children from traveling too far into the hills and getting lost, or something to scare us, akin to a boogeyman. We didn't believe that they existed. So, for a while, Joe and I decided we were going to begin going deeper and deeper into the woods until we found these signs. Either we would find them or we wouldn't. If we didn't find them, and of course we believed that we would not, then we would prove that the adults were just full of crap, and that was exactly what we expected to do. It was easy for us to take trips out into the woods whenever we wanted to. We were 13-year-old boys who grew up in the country. Camping and hiking was sort of expected, so we took trips often and would sometimes be out for days. We would take our fishing poles with us, and then we would try to find a new creek to fish in. We never really caught much because there weren't too many big fish in the creeks, but it was our thing. So that's what we did. We went further and further into the woods, trying to find these warning signs that everyone always talked about. Weeks and weeks went by and we never found anything like that. We found some old abandoned tool sheds and things of that sort, and of course we fished. But we never saw anything that indicated to us that there were any people out there. Of course, since this is a scary story, you probably know that eventually we had to find something. And yeah, we did find something one time. We had gone out this time, again with fishing equipment. I did wish at one point, however, that we would have taken hunting equipment, because that would have helped us out a whole lot more. This was a multiple-day trip. We were going deeper into the hills than we ever had before. Our parents were fine with us doing that. We took a tent and camping equipment. We camped one night and went out the next day. I have to tell you that the area was absolutely beautiful. That was really the reason that we did these trips, as after a short period of time we didn't expect to find anything. Joe called out to me. I was walking a bit away from him, but he sounded very excited. I didn't know exactly what he was excited about, but I was about to get the shock of my life. There on the tree was a sign. It was nailed to the tree, but it was made out of metal. It looked like a street sign, but it didn't have a normal street sign decoration. The sign read, "Go back or you're dead." There were some other decorative things on it as well. At first, I couldn't tell you how I felt. I was a bit excited and more than a little scared, but I was also a bit skeptical. The sign looked like it had been there for a really long time, too. It could have been put up as a joke or something. "What do we do?" I asked Joe. He thought we should go past the sign. I mean, he didn't take it seriously at all, and I was cool with that. I didn't take it seriously at first either, so Joe and I went walking past the sign, and we quickly came to another similar one. We walked in and then we found more. At this point, there were several signs hanging on different trees. They were all telling us to get out or get the fuck out or you're going to die. The signs were piling up and I was beginning to get nervous. I even suggested we really should turn back at some point, and I was serious. It was beginning to get scary. Before I could tell him anything, though, I heard a crunching sound. When I turned and looked, I felt my stomach go completely cold. A young man was standing not far from us, holding a shotgun that was pointed right at us. "Didn't you see the signs?" the guy asked. "Damn it." Joe and I immediately and instinctively put our hands up. We didn't say anything, though, because we hadn't thought we would ever be in this situation. "Didn't you see the damn signs?" he asked again. I was terrified. I can tell you that in that instant I thought I was going to die. I knew my life was completely over. Joe told the guy we hadn't seen anything. We were sorry, and if he let us go, we would leave and never come back. "Anyone ever come this far before or dead?" he said, still pointing the gun at us, but he hadn't shot us yet. It almost looked like he wasn't completely comfortable with the idea, though. That gave us just a little bit of hope. We begged to please be let go. The guy kept the gun pointed at us, but he began looking around, as if he was trying to see if anyone else was there. "Do you know what's going on out here?" he asked us. We explained that we didn't. We didn't see anything. We had no idea what was going on. We swore that we would never mention to anyone that we even found anything, and at the time we meant it. The guy looked down for a moment. I thought he was about to kill us both. "Get out," he told us. "No one saw you here but me, but if you don't get out of this area and way out way quick, I'll change my mind. If I see you in town or in school or anything, and you tell anyone anything, I will kill you. Go!" We did. We ran. We were surprised we didn't pee our pants. We packed up our tent and then we ran some more. We ran until it was dark, and we had to put up a new camp. We spent the entire night terrified. We thought the man would come back and track us down, and kill us for not getting far enough away. Every sound was terrifying. We got up right when the sun appeared. We packed up and left. We were not comfortable until we got back to my house. But that's not the end of the story. I remembered what the young guy told us, and one part of it was about if he saw us in school. When school started that fall, we saw the guy in school. The first time I did, I almost messed myself. He was a high school senior and we were freshmen. It was a scary shock, and the look he gave us when he first saw us was terrifying. We did end up talking to him eventually. He never told us what was going on out there, but he told us he had never killed anyone before, but the people he was out there with had. He told us that we were lucky that he was the one who caught us out there. If it had been anyone else, we would be dead. It would have happened in a second. I would like to tell you that this is the first time I've told the story, but it isn't, and it happened a long time ago, but I'm still too scared to put my name on it. My grandparents have always lived where I would describe as in the middle of nowhere. When I was younger, back before the internet was really a big thing, there were only the houses around in the hollow. There were no street lights, and at night I could go outside and lie in the yard and just look up at the stars. There were more stars there than I've ever seen as an adult, and I could even see the Milky Way. Sometimes I liked to look up at the sky and spin around until I got dizzy. I'd fall into the thick grass and look up at the stars that still seemed to be spinning. The house itself was nestled between two hills, with another marking the border of the back of the property, but the property itself was fairly large. Behind the house they had a barn. They kept chickens and hunting dogs, and they had a personal farm where they grew beans, tomatoes, lettuce, and so much more. I loved to visit so much, and in the summer I'd help with the farm. Well, as much as a little kid could help, at least. Basically, they'd hand me a bowl of beans to string, and I'd probably do a half-assed job that one of them would have to redo later, but they never said anything. One of my fondest memories was something my grandpa and I used to do together. He called it possum hunting. He said it with an accent and no teeth, though, so it kinda came out as podum huntin', but I always knew what he meant. Possum hunting was basically my grandpa and I going out after dark with flashlights, looking to make sure there were no possums in the chicken food, random barrels that were around, or in the barn or shed. I'm really not sure that it was ever something that needed to be done or if he just did it for me, but I always loved it either way. As an animal lover, I would never have done any real hunting, though it was a common thing in my family, and just spooking possums away from chickens didn't bother me. I don't really remember if we ever actually saw one. I remember once my dad was with us and shook a barrel to scare me and make me think a possum was inside of it, but I don't think I ever actually saw a real one. Still, this game continued as I grew older, and whenever I'd visit my grandparents, my grandpa would ask me to go possum hunting. When I was a teenager, I'd just laugh and brush off the invitation, because surely he didn't expect me, a mature woman, to go outside and chase fictitious possums. I feel a bit bad about that, now that he's gone. But there was a time in my later teens when I got my head out of my ass and realized this tradition was very important to my grandpa. This was around the time I was caring for my nephew. I'd moved in with my brother when his wife left him to help him take care of his kid. The little bugger grew on me, and for a year or so before someone else got custody, I was a surrogate mom to him. It was for this reason that when visiting my grandparents with my nephew, and the old man came up to me and said, "You want to go possum hunting?" I said yes. He was surprised, and his toothless smile grew. I turned to my nephew, who was about 3 at the time, and asked him as well. He had no idea what we were talking about, but the excitement with which I said it was contagious. He nodded emphatically. My grandpa grabbed the flashlights as I put my nephew's shoes on. It was the summer, so no need for coats. No one else in the family wanted to join in as usual, so in a few minutes we stepped out the back door and switched on our flashlights. Unlike when I was younger, there were a few streetlights down by the road, but they were far enough away to not give much light to the property behind the house. There was a back porch light, but no one turned it on. It was more of a game than anything, and it was fun to leave that light off for the atmosphere. The first area behind the house was the dog pens. When I was younger, they had been full of hunting dogs of all sorts. Now there were 2, one of them nursing a litter of puppies we had played with earlier in the day. We passed many empty pens as we walked, shining the light back and forth. My nephew stayed at my side and looked back and forth with the light, his eyes wide. I imagine he was expecting monsters to be hiding in every shadow, like I had back in the day. He had his own little flashlight, and would shine it at the darkest spots. I put my hand over my nose as we passed the old outhouse. I was pretty sure the old man still used it, though I'm pretty sure it was illegal to have it set up like he did. But it had been there forever. Finally, we came up to the barn, which was decaying more and more every year. Without any maintenance, there were broken and missing boards. They were gray and black and crooked, and in the flashlight beams it was creepy. My grandpa put a hand up to indicate that we should stop, and creeped slowly over to some sort of bin sitting outside the door. He creeped really close to it and kicked it, jumping back quickly like he expected to be attacked. I smiled, knowing there was nothing in the bin, and this was just all part of the hunt. I felt my nephew's fingers curl around mine, and I gave him a gentle squeeze. My grandpa crept back up to the bin, put his hand on the lid, and paused for a long time. Then suddenly he ripped off the lid, kicked the bin over, banging his flashlight loudly against it. He had kicked it away from us so we would not have been able to see if anything had been in it. He hooted and yelled, "Get out of here!" at the invisible possum. My nephew dropped my hand, stomped his foot on the ground, and shouted with him, "Go away!" Grandpa turned around and raised a fist in triumph. "We told that possum," he said. My nephew, having lost all his fear, cheered and pumped his fist. From that point on, he walked ahead of me, next to Grandpa, and showed no fear. "We have to go check the barn now," Grandpa said. Well, again, he said it without any teeth and a thick accent, but I knew what he meant. The old barn door was warped and I had to help him drag it open. Their chickens usually roosted among the trees on the hills, but a lone hen was disturbed by our presence and clucked disapprovingly at us before walking off to find a new roosting spot. It had been many years since I had been in this barn, and the rickety nature of it scared me. It was sad how it had decayed. It felt like it could fall down on us at any moment. My grandpa and nephew were poking their flashlights into shadows everywhere. I looked around with mine and noticed what looked like a half-broken part of a bear trap. It was probably a trap for some smaller animal, but I had only seen them as bear traps on TV, so that's what it was to me. There were some empty buckets, rotten old rags that had been chewed by mice. An old horseshoe brought back memories of my childhood. My uncle had had horses when I was very young. Sadly, he passed away, and I don't know whatever happened to them. I just remember him riding on the horse with me, and deciding at that moment that one day I would have a horse as well. Still haven't managed it yet, though. A loud cracking sound snapped me out of my thoughts, and I swung my flashlight towards the noise. I heard my nephew cry, "Get out of here, possum!" I saw the back door of the barn had been kicked open, obviously by Grandpa. One of the boards had decided it liked being closed better, and had completely broken off and stuck in the jam. That was the crack I'd heard. My heart slowed its rapid pace just a bit with this realization. I walked through the rest of the empty barn, leaving the memories there in the shadows where they probably sit and rot to this day. Walking out of the back of the barn, we shone our flashlights around and saw nothing in the trees on the hills that flanked the property. My nephew chittered on about how good we had done at scaring possums, and Grandpa suddenly shushed him. "We have to be really quiet now," he said. "See that shed?" he asked, pointing at the small shack across the yard. It was where they kept their farming stuff back when they kept up the farm. Sadly, they weren't able to keep up with it these days, so I had no idea what was in there now. I knew my grandpa was just trying to scare my nephew. That's where the big possum hides. I remember him saying that to me as a kid, but I was pretty sure it wasn't the shed he had said that about. It had been so long, though, that I really couldn't remember. I remember that my child eyes saw all of this as if I were in a horror movie. Every shadow was amplified, every sound a possible monster. For some reason, I had enjoyed being scared, and it seemed my nephew was no different. To him, this game was real, and we were scaring off the monsters to save the chickens. My nephew's eyes were big as he listened to my grandpa. He nodded, indicating that he would be quiet, and we crept across the stretch of grass towards the now rickety old building. It was much smaller than the barn, more akin to a shed anyone would have in their backyard, but just like the barn, it was old and made of wood, which was now rotting away. As we got closer, I noticed a scuffling sound. It was a light sound, like someone scuffing their feet on the ground. I listened carefully, sure it was just a normal sound of the night that I wasn't familiar with, but I couldn't quite place it. We crept closer and closer to the shed, and I realized that this was where the sound was coming from. I began to wonder if something was in there. It occurred to me that Grandpa was quite hard of hearing and probably hadn't noticed it yet. Before I could say anything, there was a loud shriek and the sound of something scratching at the rotted wood. I grabbed my nephew and had him in my arms in a heartbeat. To my surprise, my grandfather continued toward the shed, as if he'd heard nothing. I knew he was hard of hearing, but I didn't think he was completely deaf. Surely he had heard that shriek. I reached for his arm to stop him, but he sped up and was quickly out of reach. There were more shrieks and bangs as I yelled at my grandpa to stop, but he just went on and opened the door. I clutched my nephew to me and prepared to run when something large jumped from the shed. It was my brother. He and my grandpa shined a flashlight on me, and my nephew burst out laughing. I heard "the look on your face" and "got her" amidst the laughs. Obviously, while we were in the barn, he had snuck around us and gotten into the shed. My nephew jumped out of my arms and said I wasn't scared. He ran and jumped into his father's arms and joined them in laughing. What a little traitor. I scowled at them as they came over, my brother slapping me hard on the back as he liked to do, knocking the wind out of me. "Don't do that," I snapped when I caught my breath. "Ooh, she's mad now," he quipped, and they laughed at me some more. Feeling very foolish and not wanting to see the humor in it, I turned to walk back towards the house. They followed behind me, still laughing. I stormed past the barn and covered my nose as we approached the outhouse. "Hey, anyone need to shit?" my brother asked vulgarly. I rolled my eyes, but they couldn't have seen me as they were behind me. "So it's the silent treatment now?" he asked. I was fuming and couldn't decide if I wanted to be mad or pretend I was fine. As I thought about it, my brother caught up to me and stopped me a minute. He handed me his son and we stood there and waited for Grandpa to catch up to us. I wish he'd found a better place to wait. I hated smelling this outhouse. "I could go for a shit," my grandpa said to my surprise. I was always told he was a vulgar old man, but in front of me he never swore or anything. "You really still use that thing?" my brother asked him. "Well, sometimes," he said vaguely. My brother looked a little uncomfortable and asked, "You want us to wait?" "I think I can shit by myself," he chuckled as he reached the door. My brother shrugged, and we turned towards the house when we heard a shriek for the second time that night. But it wasn't my brother this time. It was Grandpa. The old man stepped backward and fell onto his back as the outhouse door swung open. In the darkness, with just our flashlights, we could only see a dog-sized shape emerge from the small building and dive for the old man's face. Whatever it was attacking my grandpa's face, clawing at it, and his screams were inhuman, but definitely derived from blood-curdling pain and fear. I shined my flashlight on it. It turned its grotesque face towards me. It was the biggest, scariest-looking possum I had ever seen in my life. Those things looked scary to begin with, but this was worse. I don't think animals can be evil, but if one could, it was this one. My brother reacted and ran up to the possum, kicked it like he was going for a field goal. He was a huge guy, and the possum was sent flying through the air. When it landed, it ran off into the woods. We helped Grandpa up, and we knew we had to get him to a hospital. When we went back to the house, my nephew ran inside and shouted happily about how we had scared off the boss possum. At first, everyone thought it was just a story, but when Grandpa entered the room with a bloody face looking worse for wear, I told them the story of the last time we ever went possum hunting. However, to the day he died, whenever he'd see me, he'd ask me with a wink, "You want to go possum hunting?" I grew up out in the country. Both of my parents worked, and it wasn't unusual for me to be home by myself. I mean, I had a brother and a sister, but sometimes they would be at their friends' houses. They tended to have a lot of sleepovers and playdates or whatever. I wasn't really the type to have a lot of friends either, so I was home a lot. And honestly, that was because that was what I liked. I was 12 years old, and I was home alone on a Sunday. Both of my parents were at work, and my siblings were not home either. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. I got up and went over to answer. I looked out the window, and there was a creepy-looking man standing outside the door. I had never seen him before in my life either. I lived on a dirt street that had only about 5 houses on it. They were pretty far apart from each other as well. Getting people to come and knock on the door, especially people you don't know, was particularly unusual. I knew that it was none of my neighbors. Also, living where we did, things were a lot different than how they do it in cities. We didn't always lock our door, and we normally weren't suspicious of people. We had a door and a screen door. I started to open up the regular door. I had only got it halfway open, though, when I noticed something. The man was holding a knife at his side. It was a hunting knife. I had no idea why he was holding it, but I had a good feeling. He noticed that I had noticed it as well. He reached for the handle on the screen door. However, as he was doing that, I had time to slam the regular door shut. He had gotten the screen door open, though, and got his hand on the doorknob of the main door. He was able to turn the knob and start opening the door. However, right before he did, I managed to chain the lock on the door. The man began pounding, and I knew that the chain would not hold forever. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife from the knife block. Coming back to the door, I began slashing the knife through the small opening, and I must have cut the guy more than once. He began screaming and yelling and hit the door really hard a few more times. I cut him again, though, and he must have realized he was not winning this proposition. He screamed some gibberish at me before running off down the street. I locked the door and called the sheriff. The man was picked up later. He was a convicted child molester and somehow knew my parents weren't home. So, yeah, that was terrifying. It was good that I noticed the knife before it was too late. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. All the copyright strikes are removed now, so we can get back to business as usual. I'm sorry I haven't been posting as much lately. I've just been really distracted with Monster Hunter Rise, I'll say. But I will get back to posting normally as soon as possible. Thanks to my friend KillerOrangeCat for letting me use the stories from his subreddit in this video. He's been helping me a lot by letting me use some of his stories lately, so be sure to check him out. I'll leave a link to his stuff in the description, and he does really good scary stories as well. They're all really unique, and most of them are original because he gets them himself personally through doing interviews and stuff, so if you guys would like to send in a story or you have a story you'd like me to read, links to all of my social media will be in the description below, including links to my Gmail, Facebook, and Twitter accounts. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, the type of story it is, if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious about the art used in this video, I have links to my artist friend in the description below. He makes really good stuff and he does commissions, so be sure to check him out if you like his stuff. And as always, links to the music used in the video will also be in the description in the order which it appears in. Thank you guys so much for watching. Not too many updates this time, and I hope you guys have a great day.